Hello and welcome to the Bottom Up Skills Podcast. I'm Mike Parsons. I'm the CEO of Qualitans and we are rocking along. We are in the next episode of our Agile software development series, and this time we're going to get into the different types and flavors of Agile. Now, in the previous episode, we really dug into some of the high level, primary thinking behind Agile, which is around values and principles and how it's all about being small, focusing on writing the code, doing the design, and going fast. And whilst these values and these principles serve us really well in understanding not only how to design teams, but I would say you can design companies around this whole idea. Once you get into the practice of Agile, what's quite remarkable is there's millions and millions of permutations and variations of Agile. And this is where sometimes people get confused. And this is where, unlike, say, design thinking, which has a clear kind of universal path pioneered by the Stanford D School, in this case, this is a much bigger practice, much more commonly used. It has a history of being related to not only lean, but manufacturing processes in the 50s and the 60s. And it's as a result of this that we actually see this huge variance, these massive portfolios of different types of way to do Agile. So I want to take you through a journey through some of those, explaining just the general difference between these so that you can start to orientate yourself around it. What I'm also going to do is really call out probably the two primary flavors of Agile software development that you'll either have heard of, you might know, or you will run into if you're working in the world of technology. So now we're going to go into the practice of Agile. And the crazy thing is that you could easily count beyond 40 different methodologies. These are ways to practice Agile, and they all have different sorts of names. Now, we're going to look at these, and I wish I could take you through them all. In fact, I wish I even understood them all because there's so many. But I'm going to give you a general sense of how they work. And then what we're going to do is focus on two particular flavors, which is Scrum and Kanban. And so we'll go into those. But first, before we get to those, I want to kind of paint you a picture of these different areas in the world of Agile. Now, the first one is one that you might have heard that was employed at Zappos, a really famous pioneering company. They do a lot of stuff in a radically different way. And they've actually taken a flavor of Agile, which has its hallmarks and origin in this idea of, self-organizing small teams. And they took that to an extreme, and that's what we call Holocracy. Now, Holocracy is a form of decentralized management and organizational governance. So this means it's very similar to what we call radical management. It's related to theory of constraints, management 3.0. But what you have to imagine at the key of Holocracy and this whole body of Agile methods is where you make the entire organization self-organizing, and it doesn't have a traditional command and control approach. It doesn't have anything like command and control. There's no waterfall. There's no top-down. It's very radical. It's organizing in small, distributed, self-organizing, decentralized groups. It's called Holocracy. Have a look. There's lots has been written around what Zappos has done in the US. They're probably one of the pioneering Holocracy companies. But what's really fascinating about this is really inspired and born out of Agile methodology and Agile thinking, Agile values and principles. So there you go. So this is one big bucket of the Agile world, that sort of more decentralized way of organizing. Holocracy being the sort of the showcase there. So now I want to move on to sort of enterprise kind of a thing. I want to move towards how you might see Agile in a more continuous, ongoing manner. This would be an approach best used in enterprise. When you want to create that enterprise rhythm and you want to deploy an approach that's around the idea of improvement. So you may have heard of enterprise Scrum. You may have heard of Spotify's what we call squadification. Again, this has sort of an organizational flavor to it. The difference between this and, say, the Holocracy approach is this still has the central governance, still has the enterprise at the center, so it's less decentralized. Another great example of this more enterprise flavor is the Mikado method, which is all about continuous improvements on existing software systems. So incremental, make it 1% of each sprint, and over time you have a better organization. And what's quite interesting is that there are a lot of European organizations have adopted this using Spotify as the sort of poster child, if you will, of this approach. And this Mikado method or Xscale is another kind of flavor of this enterprise version. This has been really quite successful. And so if you have a look at Spotify and squadification, and you're really interested in applying this continuous improvement approach, then just Google around and you'll find some really interesting stuff around this. All right, now the next one I want to go to is what we call more of a lean startup, more of an extreme manufacturing, agile unified process flavor. This is where at the heart we're starting to use some of the principles of just-in-time manufacturing, only writing code once it's been tested and validated, or as in lean startup is experimenting continuously to validate your hypothesis before you build stuff. Now, why this is so interesting is obviously the risks with manufacturing. If you start building the wrong thing and you've got your build of materials and you've got the wrong components that haven't been tested, what this agile methodology grouping does is try to de-risk some of those bigger investments. And particularly if you look at the origin of Lean Startup was born because when Eric Ries wrote the book, he talked about spending a lot of money on his startup on a bad idea. They built a bad idea in a great way because they didn't have that testing, validation. They didn't have that continuous experimentation to make sure that they're going in the right way. So this is like the third big bucket of agile methods. So you can look into that. And I think the starting point here has to be go read the book by Eric Ries, Lean Startup. Okay, so now I've left the biggest and the most popular version of agile methodologies, and that is Scrum. Scrum is easily the most popular. Informal studies say that it can be anywhere up to 70% of the practice of Agile ends up being a version of Scrum. And there are some sort of related versions of the methodology. You've got obviously Kanban, which I've mentioned. You've got Crystal, and some forms of extreme programming. They all largely coalesce around a more Scrum-like approach. And I think Scrum, for me, has the focus mostly on the team and having a small autonomous team. And it also has a certain rhythm to it. and there's a really big focus on the rhythm of working. So I want to zoom into this because kind of very related to Scrum is Kanban, and they use a number of similar tools and techniques. I think the most important thing to know about Scrum, and the reason why it's so popular, is that it works effectively with time constraint. And so it's all about time boxing a 2 to 4 week sprint over a series of maybe 3, 6, 9 sprints to deliver a piece of software. There's a lot of ritual in Scrum, kickoffs, stand-ups, reviews, retrospectives, all that kind of stuff. And everybody is working together in a particular rhythm, and it's time boxed. This is why Scrum is very successful in a business setting because, hey, in the end, we all have a deadline to meet. And this is really the preeminent flavor of Agile. Now, you will see some great things in Kanban, particularly about how to prioritize and know where work is. Now, the key difference between Kanban and Scrum is Kanban is a little bit looser. So it's not really working with fixed length sprints. Instead, it's focused on the tasks themselves. They only release code whenever it's finally ready. And so you can start to see here that it, in its purest form, it's a bit harder for an enterprise to digest because it's like, hey guys, when are you actually going to deliver something? And it has this really powerful idea about this continuous improvement, but it doesn't standardize all of those things like kickoffs, stand-ups, reviews, and sprints. It's a bit more organic and it's a bit more looser. Now, whatever flavor of Agile works for you, I think the most important thing to do is to really understand that there are many different ways you can do Agile. So I hope I've taken you through those 4 big buckets, and I hope I've inspired you to go and check out maybe Holocracy or the Spotify squadification model, or maybe you'll go pick up a copy of Eric Ries's Lean Startup. And if you're really ready to get going, I think you could do no wrong in starting with implementing some of those Scrum practices that we mentioned. Okay. Well, I hope I've given you a little bit of a sense of the spectrum of Agile software development. I hope it's provoked some interesting ideas. I hope it's inspired you. And if you want to follow up on anything you've learned in this podcast, you can head over to bottomup.io where you've got masterclasses and a whole lot more. All right, guys and gals, that is another episode of the Bottom Up Skills podcast. That's a wrap.